Okay, so I work for, sorry, I work for Allstate Northern Ireland, so I do. I have, I think now for 14 years across numerous different roles. I was part of Allstate's digital transformation when it kicked off in 2015, the Compose Labs. So my background is software engineering, program development. I moved into application security engineering role at the end of last year, and hence the WASP. So done the shift left, trying to get security into the teams, into the whole agile, into the transformation. So doing the shift left on it. So kind of, how many here has heard of a WASP or has an idea of what it is? How many knows it really well? Good, because this is kind of a skim over of the top 10 document. So OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project. It's a non-profit which ensures its success. It's not affiliated with any technology company at all, although they do support the use of commercial software technologies. The top 10, it's a guide for managing software application common security risks. And this talk is based on the OWASP Top 10 2017, which is published and made available under the Creative Commons license. So a lot of the material comes directly from that big, huge, mad document available on the OWASP website. OWASP provides a lot of other free and open resources, including application security tools, standards. They have complete books on things like application security testing, development, secure code review. They have lots of presentation videos, cheat sheets on many of the common topics, including the ones here. I think there's 76 pages of cheat sheets, and they have standard security controls and libraries. Now, as I said, I only moved in towards the end of last year. At the beginning, there was a lot of the TLAs and FLAs that caught me, the 3-letter acronyms and the 4-letter acronyms. So you'll hear me probably mention these going through the talk, so hopefully this will leave it a little bit easier. You have SAS, which is Static Application Security Testing or Source Code Analysis. You have DAS, which is the Dynamic Application Security Testing, usually through tools or pen testing or something like that. CVEs are the common vulnerabilities and exposures. You have CWEs, which is the common weakness enumerations, which a lot of the WASP Top 10 is based on. You have NIST, which is the US, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. PCI DSS is from NIST. You have NVD, which is NIST National Vulnerability Database. GDPR, we've all heard of it. PCI DSS is the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. PII, Personally Identified. So this is just some of them, but hopefully it'll leave it a little bit easier as we go through. So I like this quote. It's directly from OWASP. It's under the constant change section. But if we think about it, even without changing a single line of your application code, you may become vulnerable as new flaws are discovered and attack methods are refined. So if we think about that, your code may be secure, your application may be secure, it may work as intended. However, something may happen, or a new exploit may be found, or a new vulnerability in a library, a tool, the OS, some dependency, and suddenly your application is no longer secure. An example from last year was struts. So in struts 2, it was discovered that the Jakarta multi-part parser in struts 2 had incorrect exception handling and error message generation during file upload attempts, which allowed remote attackers to execute arbitrary commands via crafted headers, HTTP headers. And it was actually demonstrated in the wild in March 2017 with a content type header with a command built into it. This was a huge flaw, a critical one. So if you were running a struts application, it was run as grand, there was no changes made, then this vulnerability was discovered. If you hadn't patched or you hadn't done anything else, your application is exposed, it's no longer secure. I came from Simon Whitaker's talk just before this, and he had a couple of exceptionally good examples of things like that. So this is just a brief slide that kind of shows the changes from 2013 to 2017. The original goal of OWASP was to raise awareness among developers and managers. However, it has become the de facto standard for application security. Over the last few years, there's been a fundamental technology change and a shift from traditional monolithic applications to microservices. We have SPAs, very, very rich modular front ends. There's a lot of the functionality that would have traditionally been on servers is now being pushed down onto the client, which brings its own set of security concerns and challenges. So microservices, microservices come with their own, you have to establish trust between microservices, you have to look at secret management, containers, so you end up with a brand new set of challenges. So if we think there's an awful lot of old code out there that never expected to be exposed to the world. That now has an API or a RESTful web service sitting in front of it, and there's a web application or a mobile application consuming that data through that service, and it was never intended for that. So architectural considerations that was done, like trusted callers, they're no longer valid. They don't come into it. Also single page applications that you do with React, Angular, whatever the framework may be, you're pushing an awful lot of the logic that would have traditionally been on the server side down to the client. So it allows an attacker a better view into the application and how it works, and be able to craft logic attacks and get into your application. So when we look, what are the application security risks? This is directly from OWASP. We have numerous different threat agents we have. There's many different potential paths through your application. Now, some of them may or may not cause harm, and each application has to figure out what their threat agents are, what their attack vectors are, where there may be potential security weaknesses, what controls they are, whatever the technical impacts may be or business impacts may be. Sometimes these paths are very easy to find, sometimes they're quite difficult. Likewise, sometimes the harm that can be done it's trivial, there's no big deal, nobody cares, it's not going to cause anything, there's no upset. Other times it may put you out of business. And it's up to each application owner or organisation to determine that risk profile themselves. So there is no hard and fast rule. So you have to look at the threat agents, attack vectors, the weaknesses, and figure it out. These feed into the way that OWASP determine risk and actually come up with the top 10. So they do a thing called the OWASP risk rating methodology, which is now incorporated into the OWASP testing document. And OWASP uses this to actually rank the top 10. So with that, let's just get started and do a quick run through them. So the first one is injection. And this one almost fell from the #1 spot this time. The reason it didn't was NoSQL. It almost ended up as being #4. This doesn't just cover SQL injection, it covers all types of injection. So it's like a superset, but the one that we're probably most familiar with is SQL injection. It has fallen from I think 20% to approximately 5% now, mainly because of frameworks. So you have the frameworks actually provide an awful lot of protection, ORMs, things like that. So they protect us as developers from doing things incorrectly. It's not there yet, but they're hoping to get to that point with NoSQL as well. You have other injection flaws such as OS injection, command injection, LDAP injection that allow you to do lots of other stuff. Like an example would be Shell Shock from, I think it was 2014, which used an injection flaw in Bash that enabled you to run commands, Bash commands on the server that was hosting the web application. But the good news is SQL injection is going down, and they're hoping that it will drop down, if not drop out of the top 10 in the near future. So the second one is broken authentication. This one hasn't changed from 2013. The main thing is we as humans, we're very, very bad at passwords. We're extremely bad at passwords. And an awful lot of applications allow weak passwords and allow, I want a 6-digit password and okay, A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever. We're kids when it comes to that. There's ways around it. It enables brute force attacks. It allows things like credential stuffing where you actually get valid username and passwords and you just stuff requests and keep hitting the server. If you allow weak passwords or you use weak session management, then you're leaving yourself open. You don't have multi-factor authentication again. So the way around it is to just try and implement two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. Try and find out some way of blocking the automation attacks. So CAPTCHAs are okay, but CAPTCHAs can actually be a blockage to your application, and they can reduce the accessibility features of the application. So it's one of those you have to be careful. They are a step towards anti-automation, but they're probably not the best way. Two-factor or multi-factor authentication seems to be the kind of preferred one. There's a lot more information on it. You want to make sure you have a limit for failed login attempts. Check for your weak passwords, make sure you don't have any in there. There's another idea whereby now you don't just check for weak passwords, you check for previously owned passwords. So there's an API out there, you put the password in there, it checks and sees is this compromised at any stage. If it is, it's not allowed. We're not there yet, but those kind of ideas, so you won't be able to use a compromised password. Most of us just change one digit in our password and away we go. 3. 3 is sensitive data exposure. It has actually moved from 6 down to 3. A lot of the reason for this was the GDPR, as well as there was a major Equifax leak. So there was a lot of data leaked out. It's becoming more important. It's not that it has become enormously bigger, but there's been a couple of very, very big exploits and events that happened that has caused it to be pushed up. GDPR actually put the spotlight on it as well to make sure it was included. There was a CEO that sent 23,000 private keys out, and those private keys would have protected an awful lot of sensitive data. There's other things like poor transport layer security. So let's say they're using HTTPS and they're using weak crypto or weak ciphers or no ciphers. That needs to be got rid of. Using SSL or TLS with flaws, known vulnerabilities, things like that. We'll cover it later on. Another example would be, let's say you're using automatic database encryption. So the database automatically encrypts the data as it goes in. So as it's pulled back, it's automatically decrypted. So if there is a flaw, a SQL injection flaw, you've got all the data, you've everything. There is no defense in depth there whatsoever at all. Once you get in, you have all the data by default. So number 4 is a brand new one. It's XML External Entities, and this one came in purely on data alone. It was supported by SAST, or the source code analysis tools. I think it was Veracode in particular provided an enormous amount of data to them, and it was one that just came in purely on data. It affects in particular any XML parsers prior to 2014. So what happens is, if it exists on a server, then you create a malicious XML payload. You upload that to the web application. The XML parser in the web application parses it, and because there's a flaw in it, then you own the server, or you take it down, or you DDoS, or whatever it is. Now, it was fixed after 2014, but there's an awful lot of software out there that is still unpatched. So the thing is, make sure upgrade, patch, use simpler data sources or data structures, so use JSON or something like that. If you're using SOAP, make sure and get up to SOAP 1.2, but the big thing is just patch. F5 isn't exactly a new one. It's a new category created by merging from 2013. There was insecure direct object references, and there was missing function level access control in the 2013 version. They were hard to measure and hard to get data on. So what they did is they pulled them in together and created this broken access. So broken access control, your SAST and your DAS tools, your static analysis and your dynamic can actually pick up the absence of authentication or access control. But if access control is there, it can't pick up that it's working correctly. That requires manual intervention, or requires a pen test, or requires somebody to go and have a look with it. Unless, if there's an AI, nobody knows about it yet, but you would hope in some time they might get something there. But the attacks are getting more complicated, more complex. So to find them and to actually make sure and protect against them, you need human intervention. So you need to move the value chain. You have things like bypass and access control, force browsing directly to pages without being authenticated. You allowing a primary key to be changed and update or retrieve somebody else's data. Elevate your privilege. You know, let's say there's metadata, you manipulate the metadata. Cores might be misconfigured, which allows direct access to APIs. The JWT tokens or cookies, they may be weak. There mightn't be high entropy on them or something like that. So what you need to do is you need to deny by default, except for public resources. So, you know, least privilege, make sure nobody's access to anything apart from your public resources by default. Turn off directory listings, you know, things like that we kind of all know about anyways. There's a lot of information in the document and on the website about it, as well as recommendations. So number 6 is down one from number 5 in 2013. It's the most prevalent, it's the most commonly seen issue in the OWASP top 10. If you think there's an awful lot of applications, servers, software out there, by default is insecure. And it's insecure to allow developers and people to get up and running quickly. Microsoft used to be terrible at that. Microsoft gave you a machine years ago and everything was turned on by default just so you could just do stuff. They've got very, very good at it now. Everything's locked down by default. But there's loads of other software packages out there that's that way. Take, for example, you get an application server, and on that application server is some sample applications. Those sample applications aren't removed, and it turns out one of those sample applications has a flaw in it. An attacker comes, they're able to find the flaw and exploit it. Through exploiting that flaw, they're able to get an elevation of privilege or get some kind of admin access. There you go, game over. And you've done nothing or anything else, or the person putting it in. It just so happens there was a bit of value added. Those sample applications on the server, they weren't taken away. So the way around it is try and make sure that you have a repeatable hardening process. So in your CI/CD pipeline, your continuous integration, continuous delivery, make sure there's a repeatable way for hardening the application or hardening the server. You know, you've this idea now of infrastructure as code. So when you build a server, you don't build it manually. You actually use Pack or Ansible, or you use some kind of a script to actually build it and harden it for you. You want to remove or don't install any frameworks or libraries that you don't need. Get rid of them. If they're not there, there isn't a chance for holes in them. So get rid of any software, any modules, any libraries that you don't need, and just install the ones you want. Enable CSP or look at CSP, which is the content security policy headers. Make sure that they're correctly configured. It's actually quite a good one, and there's some other HTTP headers as well to lock down stuff and leave you a little bit more secure. So cross-site scripting. This one's actually way down. It's down from number 3 in 2013. It was number 2 in 2010. And the reason being is it's mainly taught because of the frameworks. So React, Angular, all the frameworks out there, they're building in more and more controls and better ways of working to actually kind of prevent us from accidentally putting XSS flaws in our applications. They do hope that as this goes on, then the frameworks will provide more and more protection, and hopefully this will drop out of it altogether. XSS is actually the second most prevalent issue in the top 10. It exists in approximately 2/3 of all applications that exist out there. So it's a huge amount. And there's 3 forms. You have reflected XSS. If you've a text box, you put in a bit of JavaScript script stuff, you run it, and you come back and it gives you your pop-up and let's say your little alert. You have the persistent or the stored XSS. So let's say I go to a blog, I put something in, it gets stored. Then every time anybody else goes to it, they get hit with that persistent XSS that I've done. And then you've DOM-based XSS. The main fix is to use frameworks for protection. Use React, just use Angular, use a framework that has it built in. Most of them have now. Make sure and enable a CSP or the content security policy headers, and they're set up correctly as a defense in depth measure. So XSS flaws, the thing with them, you have to craft a URL or you have to do something and get it sent to a user and get them to click on it. So it's one of those, it's unusual. So you have to get an email or get on a blog post or put on Facebook or social media, and it's not until you click on it that something may happen. And even at that, it doesn't mean that it does happen. Usually what will happen is you'll be logged into, let's say, a bank in one tab in your browser, then you click on the link, it opens up another tab, and suddenly you have a cross-site request surgery, you dump something else on top of it, and they have everything. So, did I miss one? No. A8 is a brand new one, and it wasn't backed by data, it was pulled in by the community from an industry survey. So it's somewhat difficult to exploit. The reason that it's in there is if it is exploited, if it's found and exploited, it will allow remote code execution, which is one of the worst things you can get. Some tools can detect it, however, human assistance is required to make sure and validate and make sure that it is a real risk and a real exploit. They believe that this will become more prevalent as we go on. There'll be higher incidences of it detected, but it was one came in from the industry. Even if it doesn't result in remote code execution, it can allow you to perform other attacks, including replay attacks, whereby if you're talking to your bank and I sniff that traffic, then I can talk to that bank and pretend that I'm you and authenticate myself as you. You can do privilege escalation attacks, you can do injection attacks, it's a nasty one, but it is difficult to exploit. So A9, using components with known vulnerabilities. This is very, very prevalent, it's widespread. Almost all breaches and exploits are traced back in some way or other to components with known vulnerabilities. Basically where applications, servers, libraries, something else wasn't patched. The software wasn't brought up to date. An example would be, let's say, the WannaCry ransomware last year. Microsoft had actually released patches for that to close out that exploit, but people hadn't installed them, or they were using an end-of-life version, so they were using Windows XP, which was end-of-life. There's another one mentioned earlier was the struts example. So struts, I think it was up to 2.3 was affected. There's still servers out there that haven't updated their Apache struts framework version, and they have a very, very serious exploit waiting to be exploited. Take a node. When you install a node package, you're getting several other node packages along with it. We're all using Spring Boot, Maven, Gradle, PyPy. So we're pulling modules in from here, there and everywhere else. We have a duty of care to make sure that those third-party modules that we're using as well don't have any exploits, and if they have, make sure they're updated. The way around this is to make sure that in your pipeline, in your CI/CD pipeline, you use things like the OWASP dependency checker or some other type of dependency checker, which will query and see for any dependencies that may have flaws or vulnerabilities. And if there is, break the build. Don't let the build go out. Raise an alert, notify people, but break the build. It's the only real way around it. Again, patch, monitor, upgrade, update, do the usual things that we all know we should be doing anyways. But if you can break the build when those are identified as part of your CI/CD and your tests, it'll help you. Number 10 is another new one. Again, it was pulled in from the community based on an industry survey. It's insufficient logging and monitoring. So there's both here now. So you need to log, failures. You need to log data appropriate for the application, and there's very good recommendations in the document. But it's no good logging it if somebody isn't monitoring it, or there's not tools monitoring, or alarms, or people get notifications. So in 2016, from identification of a breach to it actually people knowing about it was 191 days. So from the exploit to identification was 191 days. That's over half a year. It's crazy, and it's usually a third party that tells you that you've been breached. So simply logging and storing them isn't good enough. They have to be monitored, They have to have some kind of a mechanism in there for alarm set up. They have to have audit trails for any high value transactions and make sure there's integrity checks and controls to prevent any kind of tampering. Make sure there's full traceability. All failures need to be logged. You need an incident response and recovery plan. There's commercial frameworks out there and open source such as OWASP App Sensor. So it's one that came in from a survey, and if it wasn't included, they'd probably have been lynched. So kind of at a high level, this is the summary. You'll see the score down along the right column here, but it gives you a rough idea. Now, this is OWASP's risk rating. Your individual risk rating for a particular application or applications may be a lot different to this depending on what your application does. There's kind of no hard and fast rules. You will have to go through and you consider your own specific threat agents and attack vectors and business impacts. So kind of what next? Don't stop at the top 10. CSurf, which was the cross-site request forgery, fell out of the top 10. It currently sits about number 17. The main reason for that was frameworks. Injection should have fallen away from number 1 except for NoSQL DBs. OWASP have a huge amount of written up documents for next users. They have ones for developers, one for security testers. They have one for what's next for organizations, which is for CIOs and CISOs. They have one for application managers, which is anybody that's responsible for owning an application. They have cheat sheets, which is 76 pages in total on the website. They have an ASVS, which is the Application Security Verification Standard. So if a company is looking for a standard, that's the one to have a look at. And you can customize and use it yourself. There's other tools out there. Among them is OWASP ZAP, which is the Z-Attack proxy project. And it can actually, it's an interception proxy, but it also has DAST capabilities. You have WebGoat, which is now, I think, deprecated. It was an old vulnerable application. And OWASP Juice Shop, which will run Docker, you can install it. And they're vulnerable applications that you can check out and see about it. Thank you very much. We are hiring, as always, but if you need to contact me, you get me on Twitter, or if you want to contact Allstate, feel free. Thank you very much for your time.